Gemini, get ready to see what you never wanted to see. You become a person you really were not. Have you ever caught your own reflection, not just in a mirror, but in a moment, and felt a quiet ache, as if something within you barely recognizes the person staring back? That ache, that soft internal friction, is not confusion. It's your soul remembering who you once were and mourning who you've had to become. This moment in your life isn't here to shame you. It's here to awaken you. The universe is pulling back the curtain on a truth you've been carefully avoiding. Not out of fear, but out of habit. You've shaped yourself to meet expectations, to manage relationships, to keep things flowing, smiling, light. But Gemini, beneath the lightness lives a depth that's been long neglected. What's coming isn't meant to punish. It's meant to liberate. And sometimes liberation begins with discomfort, with the painful clarity of realizing you become someone you were never meant to be. This video is an invitation to breathe deeper, to pause the performance and listen to the heartbeat beneath your masks. Because that version of you, the one you tucked away in the name of peace, love, or acceptance, is stirring. And soon, they will no longer stay silent. If this resonates with you, consider liking, sharing, or subscribing. Not because you owe it, but because sometimes hearing your truth spoken aloud can be the beginning of a revolution. Now, let's begin the journey. Gate 1. The mask you forgot you were wearing. How Gemini became a stranger to their own soul. Gemini, let's begin with a truth that might sting a little. Somewhere along the way, in the pursuit of being understood, loved, and accepted, you became someone you were never meant to be. Not out of malice, not out of deception, but out of survival. You adapted, as you always do. You refined your tone, shaped your words, mirrored the energy of the room, and convinced yourself that being liked was the same as being seen. But something essential got lost in translation. You are a sign of duality, and that duality is often misunderstood. People think it means inconsistency, but it's not that. It's the vastness within you, the thousands of inner voices, the shifting moods, the contradictions that all hold truth. And when the world asks you to pick one version of yourself and stay there, something inside you starts to suffocate. So instead of being your whole self, you start performing a polished self. The one who says the right thing, the one who doesn't stir the pot, the one who nods when your soul wants to scream. At first, it feels harmless, strategic, even kind. But over time, the performance becomes a default. You smile when you want to cry. You laugh when you want to confront. You offer solutions when you're the one bleeding inside. And slowly, you begin to forget which parts of you were real and which were curated. One Gemini client of mine, a woman named Dana, shared this with tears in her eyes. I don't know who I am anymore. I know who I am in a meeting. I know who I am on a date. I know who I am when someone needs me. But when I'm alone, I feel like an empty outline, like I'm all sparkle and no core. That confession wasn't weakness. It was a turning point. Because the moment we admit we've lost ourselves is the moment we begin to reclaim what was hidden. And Gemini, that's where you are now. You're not broken. You're awakening. The discomfort you've been feeling, the strange sense that something is off, even when life looks okay on paper, is your true self banging on the door you closed years ago. It's the part of you that's tired of living for applause, tired of being charming instead of honest, tired of making people comfortable while you silently unravel. The truth you never wanted to see is that you've built a life that pleases everyone but you, and the cost of that life is growing heavier by the day. You might find yourself feeling exhausted after simple conversations. You might feel unseen in your closest relationships. You might feel like you're saying all the right things, but no one is really hearing you. That's not bad luck. That's misalignment. And it's not because people don't care. It's because you haven't shown them the real you in so long. They forgot to look. But how could they see you if you've been hiding? You become the peacekeeper, the empath, the fixer, the emotionally intelligent one who absorbs the chaos and makes it palatable. You smooth over conflicts. You avoid the conversations that might cause tension. You say it's okay, even when it's not. And at some point, you start to believe that being agreeable was your identity. But Gemini, you were never meant to be agreeable. You were meant to be electric. And being electric doesn't mean being reckless or cruel. It means being alive, honest, full spectrum, owning your anger, your boundaries, your wildness, your silence. It means knowing when to speak up and when to walk away, when to hold space and when to demand space for yourself. The mask you've been wearing, this version of you that's always polite, always adaptable, always fine, was never meant to be permanent. It was a tool, a strategy, but now it's a cage, and it's time to outgrow it. What makes this moment so powerful, Gemini, is that you're no longer content with being liked. You're starting to crave being known, not just for your intelligence or your humor or your clever commentary, but for the parts of you that are messy and moody and raw and real. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Before anyone else can know you, you have to know you. And to know you, you have to look honestly, bravely at who you've become. That means confronting the roles you've played to stay safe. It means admitting that you've stayed in relationships longer than you should have because being chosen felt more urgent than being cherished. It means facing the fact that you've silenced your intuition in exchange for approval. And it means recognizing that your gift for communication has, at times, become a defense mechanism, a way to stay surface level so no one gets too close to the truth. And I know that truth can be terrifying, because if you take off the mask, what if no one likes what they see? What if the real you is too much, too opinionated, too unpredictable? But Gemini, what if the real you is exactly what the world has been waiting for? What if the people who truly see you, the ones who love the unfiltered, unapologetic, authentic you, have been waiting for you to show up? You will lose some things when you take off the mask. That's inevitable. Some relationships may shift. Some dynamics may fall apart. But what you gain is worth everything. You gain freedom, alignment, energy, breath. You gain the ability to wake up each day and feel at home in your own skin. You gain relationships built on truth, not performance. You gain the quiet joy of no longer needing to be on all the time. And most importantly, you gain yourself. Gemini, it's time to stop playing the character you created to survive and start becoming the person you were born to be. Not perfect, not polished, but whole. This is the beginning of your return. And once you start, there's no going back. Gate 2, the quiet betrayal, when pleasing everyone meant losing yourself. Gemini, now that the mask is cracked and the real you has begun to stir beneath it, it's time to talk about what that mask was really made of. It wasn't vanity. It wasn't manipulation. It was survival. It was a subtle and seductive betrayal of yourself in the name of peace, harmony, and connection. You wake up one day and decide to abandon your truth. It happened slowly, almost imperceptibly, as you adjusted your tone, filtered your reactions, smiled when your heart ached, nodded when your spirit disagreed. All for the sake of being palatable, acceptable, safe. It begins in childhood, doesn't it? Maybe you were praised for being flexible, for not making a fuss, for being clever enough to adapt to adult emotions without ever making a mess. You learned early that approval felt safer than rejection, that understanding others was a faster route to love than demanding to be understood yourself. And Gemini, you're brilliant at that. You read a room like poetry. You sense moods, tensions, expectations before a word is spoken. You learned to shift, to smooth, to charm. And it worked on the outside, but internally, a fracture was forming. The more you molded yourself to fit the spaces others carved for you, the less space you had to stretch into your full form. And now, you're living with the consequences of that trade. The relationships where you're adored but not seen. The work that fulfills your intellect but not your purpose. The constant low hum of anxiety underneath the smile. And the haunting question that comes when the lights are off and no one is around. Who am I really? One Gemini man I worked with, Julian, had crafted a nearly flawless image. Funny, helpful, easygoing, always available. People loved him. But during one session, he broke down. He said, "I don't think anyone actually knows me, not even my wife. And the worst part is I let it happen." That's the betrayal no one talks about. Not when someone else deceives you, but when you deceive yourself. When you abandon your own needs for so long, you stop even remembering what they are. When you perform happiness so convincingly that even you forget it's an act. This isn't just emotional exhaustion. It's soul erosion. You've given away pieces of yourself for so long, Gemini, that your inner world feels like a house with too many locked doors, rooms you don't enter anymore, feelings you don't trust, needs you downplay, desires you negotiate away. And this betrayal doesn't explode. It seeps, quietly, slowly, until one day you find yourself staring in the mirror with an ache that doesn't have a name and a longing that is nowhere to land. That's where you are now, and the universe, in its uncompromising compassion, is making it impossible for you to keep betraying yourself. The relationships that once felt comfortable now feel suffocating. The conversations that used to be effortless now feel hollow. Even your successes feel strangely disconnected from your soul. That's not failure. That's your inner self refusing to be ignored any longer. Gemini, your ability to please has become a cage. And every time you say yes when you mean no, every time you make yourself small so someone else can shine, every time you silence your truth to avoid rocking the boat, you're reinforcing the bars of that cage. You've been conditioned to believe that harmony is the highest good, but harmony that costs you your authenticity is not peace, it's paralysis. And let's name what's beneath that need to please. Fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of rejection. Fear of being too much, too loud, too complicated. Fear that if people really knew you, the unedited, untamed, unapologetic you, they'd walk away. But let me tell you something important. You are not too much. The people who made you feel that way were simply not enough to hold what you carried. You've outgrown your old life. Not because you failed, but because you finally remember that approval is not love. That performance is not presence. That being useful is not the same as being valued. And I know stepping out of this pattern is terrifying. You built your identity around being the good one, the easy friend, the accommodating partner, the capable sibling. What happens when you start saying no? When you start expressing anger? When you stop apologizing for taking up space? Some people will be shocked. Some will resist. Some will say you've changed. And you will have. Because the person you've been wasn't the full truth. It was a polished reflection, a safe projection. And now the real you, the deeper you, is stepping forward. You don't owe anyone an explanation for becoming who you were always meant to be. Let me say that again. You don't owe anyone an explanation for becoming who you were always meant to be. The journey ahead won't be easy. There will be grief, not just for the relationships you may lose, but for the parts of yourself you denied for so long. You will feel guilt because you were trained to equate boundaries with selfishness. You will feel confusion because you're letting go of a structure that gave your life predictable shape. But through the uncertainty, something miraculous will begin to emerge. Clarity. The first taste of real self-love. Not the kind that depends on being perfect or pleasant or productive. The kind that lets you be messy, honest, free. Imagine waking up and saying what you mean. Imagine walking into a room without checking yourself first. Imagine choosing relationships where you don't have to earn your worth. Imagine being fully you. Not for applause, not for acceptance, but because anything less would be a disservice to your soul. Gemini, this is not rebellion. It's restoration. And the truth you never wanted to see, the one now rising to the surface, is not a punishment. It's your permission slip, your invitation, your awakening. It's time to stop betraying yourself. It's time to come home. Gate 3, when the mask falls, the collapse before the rebirth. Gemini, there comes a moment when everything you built on performance, accommodation, and emotional editing begins to collapse. Not because the world is cruel, but because your soul can no longer tolerate living in fragments. This collapse isn't dramatic on the outside. It's internal. It's the feeling of emptiness even in a full room. It's waking up next to someone and realizing they don't know you. It's listening to yourself speak and wondering, whose words are these? This collapse is not a crisis. It's a clearing, a stripping away of all that is not truly you. When the mask finally falls, it doesn't land with a crash. It disintegrates, quietly, painfully, beautifully. You might find yourself suddenly crying over a commercial, or snapping at a friend who's crossed the same line for the 100th time, or pulling away from someone you've loved for years, not because they hurt you, but because you no longer feel seen. These moments are not you breaking down. They are you breaking open. For Gemini, whose identity often lives in movement, speed, and adaptation, stillness is unfamiliar, almost terrifying. And yet, stillness is where your truth waits. In the pause after performance ends. In the silence after the laughter fades. In the moment where no one is watching and you finally ask, who am I if I'm not trying to be liked? You may find yourself questioning everything. Your job, your relationship, your friendships, even your core values. That's not instability, it's emergence. Your soul is asking you to rebuild from truth, not template. But here's the hard part. When you begin showing up as your real self, the world around you may resist. You may hear, you've changed, from those who once benefited from your people-pleasing. You may notice tension with loved ones who are used to the edited, ever-agreeable version of you. You may even feel like you're being difficult, dramatic, or ungrateful. Let me tell you, you're not. What's difficult is living in a way that denies your truth. What's dramatic is continuing a story that no longer resonates. What's ungrateful is refusing to evolve because you're afraid of outgrowing those who've grown comfortable with your smaller self. Gemini, you've carried relationships, communities, entire dynamics on your back. Not because you had to, but because you thought that was love. You believe your value came from being agreeable, helpful, funny, entertaining, calm. But real love doesn't ask you to shrink. It invites you to expand. And that's where this gate turns. From collapse to courage. Because when the mask falls and you find yourself exposed, raw, unfiltered, you also find something else. Power. The kind you forgot you had. The kind that doesn't shout but stands. The kind that says, I no longer accept less than what aligns with who I really am. I once worked with a Gemini named Kiara. She had spent years in a seemingly perfect marriage, always smiling at parties, always supportive, always available. But something inside her had gone quiet. She couldn't write anymore, couldn't cry, couldn't even laugh the way she used to. One day, during a conversation, her husband said, I love how easy you are. And something in her snapped, not because it was unkind, but because it was true. She had become easy to love by becoming easy to manage. And in doing so, she had lost herself. She left, not in anger, but in clarity. Months later, she said, I'm harder to love now, but at least it's real. And I've never felt more alive. Gemini, you don't need to become difficult, but you do need to become true. That means some conversations will be uncomfortable. That means some people will not applaud this new version of you. That means you will sit with guilt, loneliness, doubt. And yet, in the quiet that follows, something profound will rise. You'll begin to feel again, not just fleeting bursts of happiness, but full-bodied presence. You'll start noticing how your body responds to truth, how your chest opens when you speak authentically, how your stomach knots when you betray yourself, how your skin tingles when you say no and mean it. You'll see beauty again, not just in others, but in your own reflection, not the curated image, but the unfiltered gaze of someone who's finally home in themselves. This rebirth isn't pretty. It's sacred, and it's yours. As this process unfolds, expect moments of grief. You'll grieve the friendships that only knew your mask. You'll grieve the younger version of you, who did what they had to do to be safe. You'll grieve the time-lost performance. But don't let that grief turn into regret. Let it be reverence. Because that younger you, they weren't weak. They were wise. They kept you alive. They got you here. Now it's your job to take the baton and run toward your real life. There's no template for this part of the journey. No manual. Only presence. Only honesty. Only the quiet, consistent choice to show up as who you are. Even if your voice trembles, even if your truth feels too much, even if your old life no longer fits. Gemini, you are not here to be easy to love. You are here to be real. And when you become real, your energy changes. You begin to attract people who don't need the mask. People who say, I see you. People who don't flinch when you cry, who don't walk away when you express anger, who celebrate your complexity instead of asking you to flatten it. These people exist, but they can only find you when you're being you. The collapse is the invitation. The falling apart is a path. And the stillness, the ache, the unlearning, it's all part of the becoming. You're not lost, Gemini. You're emerging. And what comes next will be the most honest, liberating, beautifully imperfect chapter of your life. Gate 4, rebuilding from truth. Crafting a life that actually feels like yours. Gemini, once the illusion has crumbled and your old identity no longer holds, the question becomes clear. Now what? You spent so long being what others needed you be, clever, adaptable, easygoing, that it may feel strange, even disorienting, to begin choosing for yourself. But that's exactly what this gate is about. Rebuilding a life that feels like it was made for you, not just maintained by you. Let's begin here. For something to be truly yours, it must feel true inside your body, not just in theory, not just because it makes sense on paper, but because when you step into it, your breath deepens, your shoulders lower, your energy expands. That's your signal. That's the yes you've ignored for too long in favor of what looked right or pleased others. This is the era of your authenticity. But authenticity isn't something you declare. It's something you live, breath by breath, boundary by boundary, choice by choice. So now we ask, what parts of your current life were built to maintain your mask? Was it the career that made you seem successful but drains your curiosity? The relationship that feels comfortable but lacks depth? The friendship that's fun on the surface but leaves you feeling hollow afterward? The social performance that makes everyone else happy but leaves you bone-tired at the end of the day? You can't rebuild from truth if you continue to preserve what was built from fear. But here's the miracle, Gemini. You don't have to burn everything down overnight. Rebuilding isn't destruction, it's discernment. You get to walk through your life like a curator, holding up each commitment and asking, does this honor me or erase me? And when the answer is unclear, ask your body. Your body never lies. Gemini is a sign of air, of the mind, of movement, of conversation. But now, you are being called into your earth, your root, your center. That means moving slower, feeling deeper, letting silence stretch until the real answer comes. It means trusting your gut even when your logic protests. It means saying yes to things that light your soul and no to things that use to keep the peace. That peace was never real anyway. It was maintenance. It was delay. And now, your soul is demanding something more honest. One Gemini worked with Arden realized she built her whole life around appearing easy to love. Her apartment was curated. Her texts were polite. Her smile was always present. But when we spoke, she confessed she hadn't had a conversation that felt emotionally safe in years. She was surrounded by people, but deeply alone. When she began dismantling this facade, canceling the dinner party she no longer wanted to host, telling her partner what she actually needed, letting silence exist without explanation, everything changed. Not all at once, not easily, but beautifully. Her life grew smaller at first, but the intimacy, the relief, the realness that rushed and filled her in a way her curated world never could. Gemini, rebuilding from truth isn't about being brave once. It's about becoming someone who consistently honors their inner voice, even when it's quiet, even when it's inconvenient, even when it challenges everything you've known. It's about letting go of the reflex to apologize for who you are. It's about learning that not all discomfort is danger. Some discomfort is just growth stretching your edges. And most of all, it's about realizing that your joy matters. Your needs matter. Your preferences, your no's, your weird hobbies, your changing mind, they all matter. You don't need to be one fixed version of yourself to be real. You just need to be present in the version that's true today. So where do you begin? You begin by identifying what makes you feel alive, not what impresses others, not what fits your brand, but what makes you breathe differently. What makes you laugh without checking the room first? What makes you feel like you've returned to yourself after being away too long? Maybe it's writing. Maybe it's walking without music. Maybe it's talking to people who don't need you to sparkle. Maybe it's being alone and not feeling lonely. You don't need to have all the answers yet. You just need to start listening to the part of you that already knows. Let go of urgency. This isn't about a dramatic reinvention. This is about quiet reclamation. It's about waking up and asking, what would feel most honest today? And then letting that question lead you. The more you practice living in alignment, the more you'll notice what feels misaligned. You'll stop ignoring the tension in conversations that feel performative. You'll stop silencing your discomfort around people who drain your energy. You'll stop betraying your body's wisdom just to keep the dynamic intact. You'll become intolerant of anything that pulls you away from your core. And that's how you rebuild, not by force, but by refusal. Refusing to fake it, refusing to edit, refusing to abandon yourself, even when the world wants an easier version of you. And yes, there will be moments where it feels lonely, but that loneliness will be sacred because it will be honest. And in that honesty, something magical happens. The right people find you, the ones who aren't afraid of your depth, the ones who don't flinch when you get messy, the ones who see your wholeness, not just your light, because your wholeness is the gift, not the smile, not the wit, not the adaptability, but the fire, the truth, the contradiction, the tenderness, the fierce clarity. That's the version of you that rebuilds from truth. That's the version of you that finally feels like home. Gate 5, living unapologetically. The return to your original frequency. Gemini, the masks are off, the foundations of your old life have shifted, and what remains is something precious. You, not the version people clung to, not the edited, over-functioning, emotionally pleasant you, but the real, raw, unfiltered essence of who you were before the world taught you to behave, to blend in, to smile through your silence. Now you stand on new soil. It may still feel unfamiliar. You may still reach for the habits of the past, apologizing before speaking, offering comfort before expressing need, censoring your depth to keep the peace. But there's no more space for that version of you to lead, because now you know better, and what's been seen cannot be unseen. This is the beginning of your original frequency returning, the sound of your soul when it is not distorted by fear or performance, the way your energy moves when it's not weighed down by false roles, the rhythm of your thoughts when you are free to think for you, not through the filters of expectation and relational management. You are beginning to move differently now. People will notice, so will be drawn in with awe. Others may flinch, step back, even attempt to guilt you into shrinking again. They may say things like, "You've changed," or "You're being distant," or "Why are you making everything so complicated?" Gemini, don't take their reactions as a reason to regress. Take them as confirmation you're evolving, and evolution always disrupts what was designed to contain the older version of you. Here's something tender and important. Not everyone will come with you, and that's okay, because this next chapter requires people who meet your wholeness, not just your highlight reel. People who know how to listen when you're not trying to impress. People who can sit with your silence, your uncertainty, your contradictions, and not try to fix you or fit you into a box. Those people exist, but you'll only find them when you stop performing for the ones who don't. Living unapologetically doesn't mean becoming rigid or reckless. It means becoming integrated. It means letting every part of you have a seat at the table. Your anger, your wisdom, your wildness, your grief. It means honoring your shifting truths without asking for validation. It means letting your no be full and your yes be honest. You don't have to explain why something no longer fits. Your piece is reason enough. And I know it may feel strange at first. You've trained yourself for years to anticipate needs, adjust tone, soften blows, preach you your truth for easier digestion. But that's not love. That's emotional labor. And you are not here to work for love. You are here to live in love. Real, soul-deep mutual love. The kind that doesn't ask you to shrink. This final gate is your invitation to begin creating that life. Not in your mind, not someday, but now. So what does that look like? It looks like speaking when your voice shakes. It looks like letting the text go unanswered when your energy is sacred. It looks like walking away when something feels wrong, even if no one else sees a harm. It looks like dressing how you want, laughing louder, saying you're tired without guilt, choosing rest without needing to earn it, choosing yourself not out of selfishness, but out of reverence. It looks like catching yourself in the act of people-pleasing and asking, is this kind or is this codependent? It looks like knowing that conflict is not the enemy. dishonesty is, and it looks like honoring the new integrity of your life. That sacred alignment between what you feel, what you believe, and what you do. Gemini, this is your new baseline. And no, it won't always feel graceful. Some days will be messy. Some decisions will be hard. But even your hardest day in truth will be more fulfilling than your most peaceful day in pretense. The more you live in this alignment, the more life will begin to mirror it. Opportunities will find you, not the version of you projected, but you, the real one, the one who stopped performing, the one who started choosing. And the more you choose from truth, the more you'll trust yourself. You'll stop second-guessing. You'll stop pulling the room. You'll stop living for reaction. You'll start living from intuition. And the world will adjust, not because you demanded it, but because you decided. And when you decide to be who you really are, consistently, unapologetically, the world around you reconfigures to match. This is the beginning of a life where you are not a supporting role in someone else's story. This is your stage, your pen, your voice. This is where the real Gemini returns. Not the dual mask bearer, but the soul bridger, the truth teller, the free thinker, the shapeshifter who doesn't lose themselves in transformation, but finds themselves through it. So live loudly now, Gemini. Say the thing. We're the color. Leave the room. Start the chapter. Burn the script. Be hard to pin down. Be impossible to define. Be real. Be whole. Be you. Because when you do, without apology, without explanation, without shrinkage, you don't just heal yourself. You give others permission to do the same. Conclusion, this is not the end. It's the first real beginning. Gemini, if you've made it here, you already know something deep within you has shifted, not through force, not through drama, but through the steady, courageous act of facing the truth you never wanted to see. This wasn't just a lesson in letting go. It was a return to your essence, a remembering of the self that existed before you were shaped by expectations and masked by perfection. You haven't become someone new. You've simply uncovered the you that was always there, waiting beneath performance, the people-pleasing, the polished exterior. And yes, the journey has been uncomfortable. The collapse was real. But what emerged from those ashes wasn't brokenness. It was freedom, clarity, integrity. Now, you move differently, not to be liked, but to be aligned. You speak differently, not to impress, but to express. You choose differently, not out of fear, but out of truth. This is what real transformation feels like. Quiet, sacred, irreversible. And this is just the beginning. Because from here, Gemini, everything changes. Your relationships will reflect your truth. Your choices will reflect your soul. And your life will begin to feel like home. Not because it's perfect, but because it's yours. If this message resonated with you, I invite you to share in the comments. Have you begun to notice the gap between who you are and who you've been pretending to be? Have you started saying no when you used to say yes? Have you felt both the grief and the exhilaration of coming back to yourself? Your voice matters, not just for you, but for every other Gemini walking this path beside you, quietly waiting for permission to do the same. And if you're ready for more support, more truth, more guidance, subscribe now, because what comes next will be even more powerful. You return to yourself, Gemini, and from this moment on, you don't have to leave again.